Thank you. And much of what I got to say actually moves on quite handily from what I've said there. I'd say as one non-academic on the panel, I did not know Stuart well. I had lunch with him once when I was doing a piece about Notting Hill Carnival, and at other times he would just be always very generous to me, dropping me notes about articles. At one point, kind of quibbling with me when I did a thing about the politics of the World Cup. He was watching the World Cup, I think, with his grandson. But what struck me about him always was that such an intellectually grand man could be so unpopular, could be so generous, and so warm. In my daily life, the thing that I've inherited most from Stuart is the term policing the crisis, which is how I describe parenting. I have two children who are 10 and 4. When people say, what are you doing this weekend? I always say, well, I'm policing the crisis. I want to talk about a tale of two pictures. The first is of a lifeless child, face down in the surf, the Mediterranean lapping at his corpse. His name is Alan Kirby. He was 3. And the picture was taken in August 2015. Racism in there. European nations, led by Britain, cowered by the prospect of inflammatory headlines and the forward march of the far right, refused to rescue those in peril as they crossed the Mediterranean. They said saving people from drowning was a pull factor, so they let them drown. And Alan washed out near Bodrum in Turkey into a moral vacuum and forced some kind of engagement with our political calendars. This was what it took to make it clear that it was human beings we were talking about and not, as Katie Hopkins had described them, cockroaches. Like Kafka's Metamorphosis in reverse, the insect became a person with Alan Kirby. And only then could the mob be momentarily marginalised and the polity embarrassed into reckoning with its moral and legal obligations. To me, the presence of this mob was not news. Fascism had returned as a mainstream ideology in Europe, and its rhetoric was infecting political cultures like arsenic in the water supply. But what was news to me, only recently returned from the States, like in the previous 3 weeks, was the huge numbers of people who came forward to offer shelter and sustenance. People in Hungary who gave the refugees water and toys as they undertook their long march. People in Germany who lined the streets to welcome them. The thousands of Icelanders who opened up their homes to refugees after the state offered to house just 50. And here the Brits who collected clothes and supplies and headed for the south coast. And much of that activity continued over the year. These were the people that I was never sure existed. People who were prepared to actively welcome migrants and refugees with a popular and spontaneous expression of humanity and generosity that we'd been told had been sucked dry. People who were absent from every political calculation thus far. Now, the political limits to that are obvious. A refugee crisis is what they were talking about at the time on that scale can't be solved by individual acts of charity, and government should not be relieved of their international obligations. Victories we once thought we'd won, we were soon to realise we would be forced to defend. People would soon be shouted at in the street again, have their hijabs torn from their heads. They have been pretty much since, at least since 2001. I'm not convinced that in this new moment with Brexit and Trump and so on that we have more racists than we did, but I'm certain that racism and racists have been emboldened. But for all that, the potential of this moment, that moment, should not be understated. Because if those people can lend political form to those personal endeavours, then they too, if mobilised, could set an agenda. And only then could we start to turn back the tide before more children are going out to wash ashore. But then there was another picture. The Sun and the Mail ran front pages of young men coming into Britain. This was in October 2016. The Mail with the headline, Child Refugees Debate. Child refugees in quote marks. The Sun with the more derisive, but my haven't you grown. The refugees that they showed were older than Alan and therefore deemed unworthy of our sympathy, let alone empathy, and certainly not solidarity. In each case with the papers, they guessed the real ages of the people in the pictures using computerized assessments and plenty of prejudice. We know this guesswork is unreliable, that it's filtered through prejudice and then marinated in fear. 2014 study in the American Psychological Association's online journal revealed that white Americans overestimated the age of black boys over the age of 10 by an average of 4.5 years. White respondents also assumed that black children were more culpable than whites or Latinos, particularly when the boys were matched with serious crimes. Dr. Philip Atiba-Goff of UCLA said children in most societies are considered to be in a distinct group with characteristics such as innocence and a need for protection. Our research found that black boys can be seen as responsible for their actions at an age when white boys still benefit from the assumption that children are essentially innocent. So the subtext to these pictures and the headlines is not difficult to divine. There is no such thing as child refugees. It's all a scam, and they are all scammers. They are liars and cheats. There are no innocents among them. 3 months later, the government reneged on its commitment to provide a safe haven for thousands of vulnerable lone children of child refugees in Europe, after only 350 had been brought to Britain. This was both more repulsive and less shocking to me. In the neoliberal world, the globalized other has long been the focus of anxieties for everything from terrorism to culture to jobs. In a world where capital can roam freely but people cannot, society operates according to the golden rule. That's that those who have the gold make the rules. In a world where multinationals now have more power than nation states, people feel desperate to reassert some sense of agency in their lives. And in this context, the visible other is joined by the acculturated other, and more recently, post-Brexit, the audible other. People who are shouted at, hit, even killed because they are heard to speak another language. And there is an elision, a clear elision between these things, which is understood as confusion, but I don't think it's confusion at all. So that post-Brexit, the increase in attacks on people who are visibly Muslim increase, the number of attacks on non-white people increase, when we can be reasonably certain that those people do not come from Eastern Europe, which ostensibly was the focus of the Brexit debate. The consequence of the Brexit debate opened up a range of racist pathologies that had nothing to do with Europe. But I think that is actually consistent with much of the rhetoric that took place during that campaign. So I knew there was a large constituency for this. It's how Alan ended up dead in the first place. But it's made me wonder where that previous constituency is and how it might be cohered, energized, mobilized, and given form and force. The way we see things, wrote John Berger in The Ways of Seeing, is affected by what we know and what we believe, but the relation between what we see and what we know is never settled. When it comes to immigrants, Europeans don't know very much and presume a great deal. An Ipsos Mori poll showed that Brits and Spaniards believe they have twice as many immigrants in their country as they actually do. In Italy, Belgium and France, it's 3 times as many as they actually do. In Hungary, 8 times as many. In Poland, more than 30. No wonder they're freaked out. For years, politicians on both sides kept saying it was time for an open and honest discussion about immigration. But the truth is, we've been talking about little else for quite some time, and the trouble is, the conversation has been anything but open or honest, nor has it been well informed. There's no sensible, coherent debate about immigration that you can have without talking about international trade and development, about war and environmental catastrophe and global inequality. So long as the world lives on, most of the world lives on less than $10 a day, then the poor will move in search of food and work. So long as we either displace or impoverish people through war, unfair trade and unethical arms sales, we will be in part responsible for people having to move. Moreover, unless we discuss the needs of an aging population here, the number of people that over 85 is predicted to nearly treble in Britain over the next 30 years. And the net benefits that migrants make to our tax coffers, then the conversations will never be complete. Every discussion about foreign policy, international development, economic growth, labour regulation, European Social Fund, climate change, should also be an integral part of the argument or debate about immigration. But it's not. And what I think the responses to these 2 pictures show, following on from what Ash said really, is that the issue of immigration is far more in play than a political class would have us believe. That there is a case that can be made that goes beyond simply an appeal to human decency, important as that is, to the economic needs of the country and the things that we do abroad, for which there is precious little domestic support. We've not lost the immigration debate. We haven't had one. And in the absence of any serious discussion about our needs and responsibilities, all sorts of vile hucksters, shibboleths and non-sequiturs have taken root. Now, they won't be moved by pictures alone. The media doesn't simply create these memes, it reflects them. And the images don't cut political communities from whole cloth. They attach themselves to pre-existing constituencies. But while one of those constituencies has advocates in the press and parliament, the other remains inchoate and at the mercy of a so far unengaged civil society. So what's become clear this last couple of years is that that society exists. We don't know yet what it's capable of because it has not yet been asked.
How important the global context and what in my work I call under neoliberalism the double crisis of governability and governmentality links this whole aspect of migration to contesting political projects of belonging as on the one hand and the whole securitization as a supposedly visible signifier of effective governance, on the other hand, by the state. And of course, what was not mentioned probably, but should be mentioned in terms of representation is the whole notion of fake news, that the relationship between what the media reflects and affects, let alone the situated gazes and selectivity, but that in a way the distance is coming further and further. There have been so many important issues, which of course are interrelated, but also different strands are important in their own right, that have been raised in the 4 presentations. maybe before we ask some kind of coherent conversation around particular issues, people would like to raise particular questions or reactions to some particular contributions.